global dairy sector on our Pathways to Dairy Net Zero initiative. It's my pleasure to be your moderator as well as one of your speakers for today. I'm Donald Moore, the Executive Director of the Global Dairy Platform, and it is my absolute honor and privilege to introduce the first of our opening speakers for today. After our speakers have finished, we will have an update on both the Pathways Initiative and the research behind it, followed by two panels. The first panel talking about the progress in emerging dairy markets, followed by a second panel talking about the progress in the developed dairy markets. And then we'll have time for some Q&A before we have a closing from Secretary Vilsack from the US. But our first speaker this morning is Mr. Fernando Matos. He is the Minister of Livestock, Agriculture and Fisheries for the Republic of Uruguay. Mr. Matos is an Uruguayan agroeconomist, businessman and politician. He's a member of the Colorado Party, and he is the Minister of Livestock, Agriculture and Fisheries in the cabinet of Luis Lacalle Pou. And I probably messed up the pronunciation because I could see Cecilia laughing at me. But Minister, it's my delight to welcome you to the stage for your opening remarks.
Okay, good morning, Mr. Moore. Thank you very much for the invitation. First of all, I would like to thank the Global Dairy Platform for organizing this event and giving me the chance to welcome you all this session at the Pathways to Dairy Net Zero initiative. Uruguay globally represents 0.03% of global emissions. Agriculture is our main source of emissions. 73% of these emissions are related to the agriculture and land use, but also 100% of carbon capture is done by agriculture. Methane from enteric fermentation represents more than 50% of our emissions are methane. Uruguay is an agriculture-based country and therefore very vulnerable to climate change impacts to the sector, including droughts, flooding, and storms. The dairy industry in Uruguay generates 6% of the value of industrial production at the national level, and 20% of this corresponds to added value. 7% of the milk processed in Uruguay is sold to foreign markets, contributing to food security. Main markets are Argelia, Brazil, and China, of the main destinations of our exports. Already, we are also the main exporter of Latin America and high-level consumption in domestic market. Despite of our emissions and high vulnerability, the country signed to the Global Methane Pledge at COP26 in Glasgow, reaffirming our commitment to the Paris Agreement, ensuring always that our efforts to reduce emissions do not compromise food production. In line with this, Uruguay's strategy is to encourage a reduction in emissions intensity in the food sector, optimizing processes and incorporating new practices and technologies. Uruguay joined Pathways to Dairy Net Zero initiative along with 100 organizations from around the world who represents 30% of global milk production. In this framework, we were invited by the Secretary of State of the United States, and together with 9 other countries, we have begun the process of designing a global project that allows the initiatives to materialize. We have worked together with all the stakeholders in the country's dairy sector from rural farmers, industry, and academic, identifying gaps and barriers to achieve production systems that emit less and capture more carbon while being more resilient and adapted to climate. If we want to really tackle the climate change challenge, we need to work close to those gaps together. The Path to Net Zero initiative is an opportunity to work together to move forward low-carbon dairy systems that produce healthy and sustainable food. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Minister Matos, for your opening remarks. It's now my pleasure to welcome to the stage Tanawat Tiensen, who is the Director of Animal Production and Health Division at the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization. Mr. Tiensen will be offering welcoming remarks on behalf of FAO's Director General, Dr. Xu Dongyu, who was unable to join us this morning. Mr. Tiensen is Director, as I mentioned, of Animal Production Health Division. Previously, he was the chairperson of the UN Committee on World Food Security and also the permanent representative for Thailand to the Rome-based agencies in Italy. So, Tanawat, can I welcome you to the stage, please?
Very good morning. Thank you, Donald, for your introductions. And on behalf of FAO Director General, we would like to express our sincere thanks to the invitation to join these events with all of you here at COP27. And also, first of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the government of Paraguay and international dairy federations and also the Global Dairy Platform for your joint effort to discuss what the dairy sectors is doing, what the dairy sectors moving forward together to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, to reduce the environmental impact. The dairy system globally make an enormous contribution to food and nutrition securities and the livelihood of billions of people worldwide. In recent decades, milk and dairy productions has significantly increased around the world, as Minister mentioned earlier, and also providing nutritious dairy products to the growing world populations. And during my visit in India at the World Dairy Summit, organized by International Dairy Federation together with other dairy partners, you have seen, you have heard by yourself from the Prime Minister of India, the ambitions of the countries, how they're going to develop the dairy sectors for better futures, better nutrition, better nutritional securities for all. The pathway to dairy net zero that we are discussing today is the actions of all dairy sectors. People around dairy sectors are working together to move forward, to see more actions, more result. How we're working together to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, to reduce the global impact. Because dairy is a part of agri-food system, and dairy sectors also make a lot of contributions, and that's why we need the global positive and balanced narrative of dairy sectors. And FAO is a part of this initiative, and we will do all what we can support to make sure that we will succeed. We can make achievement together. And taking this initiative to the scale require investment. And FAO is working together with our colleagues from International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, and other partners to formulate a major investment program with the Green Climate Fund, which actually during this week I also had an opportunity to discuss with colleagues from Green Climate Fund to make sure that we can do more, to make sure that we can support our member more, to make sure that we can invest more for dairy sectors, for livestock sectors. And that's why once we are discussing about the pathway to dairy net zero, the first phase of this initiative will be brought in, and also to make sure that we can support and scale up the work in Eastern Africa, and also we will move forward to other regions in Asia, in Latin America, and many more countries in Africa as well. And that's why we know that it's a time to take actions, and that's why we need your to step forward together, to make sure that together we can make difference, to make sure that together we can succeed, and also to make sure together we can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, to make sure that this dairy sectors is a part of solution, and we will bring solution to our planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tiensen, for your opening remarks. And now we move to Mr. Pier Cristiano Brazale. Pier Cristiano is the president of the International Dairy Federation and also a board member of the Global Dairy Platform. And IDF, Uruguay, and Global Dairy Platform are the co-hosts for today's event. Mr. Brazale has been president of the International Dairy Federation since November 2020, and prior to that he was the chair of the IDF Standing Committee on, the IDF Science Program Coordination Committee, apologies for that, and he's been a member of that actively since 2015. Mr. Brazale is also the owner of a family cheese business in Italy, which produces my favorite cheese in the world, Gran Moravia. Apologies to the Dutch for that. Pier Cristiano, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Donald. Later, I will give you some cheese. I have a written speech to stay in the time. So, in the name of IDF, I'm pleased to welcome you to this side event that we organize together with the Global Dairy Platform and Uruguay. The dairy sector plays a critical role in sustainable food systems and healthy diets. The global dairy sector is fully committed and engaged in sustainability and climate action. The Dairy Declaration of Rotterdam, signed in 2016 by IDF and FAO during the World Dairy Summit in Rotterdam, to which nearly 26 countries have already committed, and the Pathways to Dairy Net Zero initiative, launched in 2021 during the UN Food Systems Summit, are some of the world's dairy sectors' response to this global challenge. So far, more than 120 leading organizations and governments, including the 10 largest dairy companies in the world, altogether, these supporters represent nearly 40% of the global milk production. At the same time, the global dairy sector is engaging in other multiple sustainable initiatives, activities and practices to mitigate its negative impact and foster its positive ones, like the ecosystem services that livestock in general and dairy in particular generate worldwide and on a daily basis. IDF plays a substantial role in developing and promoting the standards and guidelines, and in showcasing these initiatives and practices that take place both in developed and emerging countries. The recently published revision of the IDF Global Carbon Footprint Standard for the dairy sector and the LCA guidelines for calculating carbon sequestration in cattle production systems are the latest examples of IDF work to support sustainable practice and global climate action in dairying around the world. Also, the publication of the IDF Dairy Sustainability Outlook, including a special COP27 edition available for free on our corporate website, is our way to disseminate impactful and sustainable practice put into action by farmers and processors worldwide. The 6 editions of the series include successful stories of commitment to the UN Sustainable Development Goals and climate action in different farms and processing plants from small size to large one in multiple regions of the world, which shows that the only indispensable resource to put sustainability into practice is the will to commit to change and action. The global dairy sector commitment to sustainability and climate change without affecting its ability to nourish over 6 billion people and providing livelihoods to 1 billion is something that makes me feel very proud and optimistic about the future, regardless of the complexity of the challenges we currently face. We have a dynamic, innovative, and resilient sector. We must continue to work together with IGOs and governments in generating the condition to enhance positive impact. During the World Dairy Summit, IDF World Dairy Summit in India, we could listen to hundreds of testimonies of how the right policies for the dairy sector can generate favorable impact and outcomes without compromising sustainability. I want to deeply thank both the government of Uruguay and the Global Dairy Platform for hosting this side event with us. I wish you all a fruitful and interesting day.
And thank you again to all of our opening speakers. You may now leave the stage, gentlemen, so that we will move on to... I have such control, don't I? Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, we're going to change gears a little bit now, and I'm going to give you an update on the Pathways to Dairy Net Zero initiative, followed by Harry Clark, who's going to represent the Global Research Alliance, talking about some of the progress that we're making in the research area. I'm going to do about 300 slides in 5 minutes, so stay with me if you wouldn't mind. Starting off with, I thought it's important to point out the background to sustainability in the dairy sector. Sustainability is not something that the dairy sector has come to in the last year. This is a topic that we've been working on for decades now. In fact, 10 years ago now, back in 2013, during the IDF World Dairy Summit in Yokohama, Japan, we launched the Dairy Sustainability Framework. And today, through that framework, we are tracking about 30%, a little over 30% of the world's milk production through that framework, and that represents about 52% of the formal milk in the world, recognizing that not all milk goes through processing plants. And that milk is being tracked across 11 different dimensions covering economic, social, as well as environmental outcomes. Working with the Dairy Sustainability Framework, we produced this report with FAO's help back in 2018-2019. This report tracked the dairy sector over a 10-year period, and in that time period pointed out that dairy's emission intensity in that 10 years had reduced by 11%, but the absolute emissions had gone up by 18% because dairy production had grown 30%. So as a dairy sector, we said it's good that we're able to bring down emission intensity, but we also need to ultimately focus on absolute emissions. That led us early last year to launch this initiative, Pathways to Dairy Net Zero. And I'm delighted to say that this is an initiative that's a collaboration between 6 organizations. Ourselves, the Global Dairy Platform, the International Dairy Federation, who you've just heard from, ILRI, the International Livestock Research Institute, the Dairy Sustainability Framework, the SAI Platform, and the IFCN Dairy Research Network. and we are supported very ably by the Global Research Alliance on Agricultural Greenhouse Gases as our knowledge partner, with a lot of support from FAO as well. What's the objectives of this particular model? Well, I think the first thing I want to point out is that we recognize in the dairy sector that we need to be careful that we don't tackle the challenge of reducing emissions from dairy while creating another problem, either in nutritional security, in animal care, or indeed in some other element of the environmental outcomes such as biodiversity. So this is a complex problem that we are trying to solve, and I think Dr. Tiensen's comments led you to understand the complexity of balancing livelihoods, economic growth, nutritional security with environmental outcomes as well. We also recognize there is not one dairy system in the world. There are 133 million dairy farms out there. No two of them are identical. So one of the things we're really focused on, and we'll hear from Dr. Clark, is the work that's going on to identify different farm system topologies and mapping the mitigation options, the different pathways that will be required. As you heard Minister Matos comment, we already have over 140 organizations who have signed up for the Pathways to Dairy Net Zero initiative. If you didn't see your own logo on that slide, there is still plenty of room for us to add more organizations to that. Between them, in fact, Minister Matos, we're now up to over 40% of the world's milk production being covered by those organizations that are supporting pathways. The top 10 dairy companies in the world have signed up, many smaller dairy companies, and many countries are now signing up to this initiative. In terms of the progress in 2022, there's two streams of activity here. The first is all the work that's going on in the research area, and I'm going to leave that to my friend Harry Clark to talk to you about. The second is in execution, and we have two panels today who are going to talk particularly about the execution activities in both the developed dairy markets and emerging dairy markets. But I wanted to share a little bit of breaking news with you, if I may, in terms of the emerging markets. You heard Minister Matos comment that the US State Department had invited a number of countries to join this initiative as early adopters. In fact, there are 10 emerging dairy economies who have been invited to join Pathways to Dairy Net Zero as early adopters. The 10 are listed on the screen there. 9 of them, their governments have already signed on to the program, and we're still in discussions with India. But in particular, in East Africa, we've already started the development of the first Green Climate Fund submission on behalf of the dairy sector, and I'm delighted that we have both FAO and IFAD with us this morning to talk about the work that's going on in there. And we're also being supported financially by the Global Methane Hub, by USAID, and also by CoBank. So we're delighted with the support that we're receiving there, and I'm looking forward to hearing more from our panelists today. And with that, this is the web address. If you want to know more about Pathways to Dairy Net Zero, I would be absolutely delighted to share that with you. Got to get my notes now. And now it's my delight to welcome Harry Clark to the stage. Harry, I will cue your presentation for you. Harry is the co-director of the New Zealand Agricultural Greenhouse Gas Research Consortium, and he's in charge of the overall strategic and scientific direction of the organization, as well as its day-to-day operations. Harry is a member of the New Zealand Climate Change Commission and co-chaired the Livestock Research Group of the Global Research Alliance on Agricultural Greenhouse Gases from 2010 to 2022. And I can't think of somebody better to be with us today to present the results of some of the research that's going on in that area. I'll let you talk while I cue your...
Thank you, Donald. Today I have a different hat on. I've just been appointed Special Representative of the Global Research Alliance, and so my talk today is a role of the Special Representative. Now,
I need to get very close.
and I am not Hayden Montgomery. Hayden left the role about 3 weeks ago, and I inherited a slide pack, but he didn't give me a way of getting his name off them. So at the moment, I'm stuck with Hayden's name on the slide pack. And like Donald, it will be a very quick run through. because a number of the things that I want to say have already been said. So yes, the Global Research Alliance is a knowledge partner to the Global Dairy Platform. The GRA it's a 66-member country organization formed in around 2010, and it was formed to bring together countries to grow more food without growing greenhouse gas emissions. Currently, as I said, 66 countries, 27 partners, a network of around 3,000 scientists throughout the globe. And we are working on behalf of the Global Research Alliance to support this initiative from the Global Dairy Platform. Again, I think this has already been mentioned. Yes, we fully understand how important dairy is to nutrition and livelihoods, but we also have to face the fact that it is an emitter of greenhouse gases. And as Donald said, we've made great progress in reducing emissions intensity, but because of the rise in demand for dairy, emissions have gone up. And so the aim here is to try and continue expansion of dairy, continue making sure dairy contributes to livelihood, food security, but without growing greenhouse gas emissions. And can we actually develop a pathway that gets them down while meeting the growing demand for dairy? And just again, a little bit of detail, this shows around the demand, and demand is growing everywhere, apart from perhaps some parts of Western Europe and Eastern Europe. Demand for dairy is growing, and we will need to accommodate any mitigations within that pathway of increased demand. So what are we trying to do? From a research perspective, and as Donald said, no two dairy farms are alike, but we have the kind of challenge of saying, how can we categorize dairy systems worldwide and develop a relatively simple but robust typology where each dairy farm can be put into one of these typologies. And then we can start looking at the appropriateness of actions to bring down emissions, but these actions need to be appropriate to the kind of dairy system. And then once we have got a categorization, we can look at business as usual scenarios. What would happen if we didn't do anything within these scenarios? And then what are the options to change that future pathway, and how can we develop these low emission pathways that are based on realistic assessments of the mitigation opportunities for each of these dairy typologies? And this is not the finished product, this is illustrative, but this is what we're looking at. And there's a very well-known graph that came, I think, initially from Pierre Gerber at FAO, which categorizes or maps out emissions intensity against milk yield per cow. Now, it is quite simplistic, but you can see that as milk yield per cow increases, emissions intensity tends to go down, and there's a lot of data on that. And then if we, in actual fact, try and develop a typology across that, this typology we've got goes from this very sort of extensive right through to the intensive, high production per cow, but very high input systems that we see. But as you can see, once you get to around about 5,000 kilograms per cow milk yield, you don't change intensity that much. It doesn't go down that much. But what you do see across all of those is a very big difference in the mix of gases that come from those dairy operations, and hence the differences in the kind of mitigation actions you need to take within each of those systems. As I said, this is illustrative, it is not the final typology, but this is the system we're working towards. And to test the robustness of that typology, we're looking at case studies. So we're trying to get case studies that span that typology, and then we can look in more depth at what mitigations apply to each one of those case studies, and then look at the robustness of our methodology and always come back and change our methodology if we need to. And we're trying to really span that high input right back to the very low input extensive smallholder. And again, what we need to think about with mitigations, it's about effectiveness of mitigations, appropriateness of mitigations, and you know, what is the likely uptake of those mitigations and what can drive uptake? So here again, just illustrative, we're looking at what the potential effects of an individual action is, what the likely uptake is, and then we'd hope to develop this map that shows us, you know, the best and most appropriate mitigation actions in each of our typologies and systems. What we do have to acknowledge is there are many barriers to the adoption of efficacious mitigation options, and we have to look very carefully. There are national circumstances, the typologies differ. Regulatory barriers are, in some systems, are very, very, very difficult for some mitigations. How do we incentivize mitigation actions? What will incentivize a farmer to take those mitigation actions? If it has co-benefits with productivity, and in many instances it does, it's straightforward. But what happens if it comes at a cost without any productivity benefit? Who bears that cost? And then, interestingly enough, things like farmer attitudes. One of the most advanced mitigation options in the developed world are things like feed additives, chemical additives that may well be very effective at reducing emissions. We've recently undertaken a survey, and 20% of farmers said they wouldn't use them. 30% of consumers said they would not buy a product if it had a chemical additive. Now, you can take those as you wish, because consumer surveys are notoriously inaccurate. But I think we do have to think about that as a barrier. And also, what about market access? Not everyone would like a genetic modification as a solution, etc. So it is complex. And the distribution of milk yield provides, I think, challenges and opportunities. When we look at the mean, many of those countries below the mean and those systems below the mean are in areas that are going to be badly affected by climate change itself. There are areas where it is going to be challenging to bring in the practices that will give us low dairy production. But a lot of those, there are synergies. There are synergies between efficiency and low emissions pathways. And so you can argue it's a challenge, but you can also argue it's an opportunity. But this is what we're really trying to get to, is my last slide. If we look on the left-hand side with the top red one, about 2.7 gigatons of emissions, if we don't do anything, we will get to 3.5 tons. But if we can start identifying opportunities, we can see that there are a number of opportunities that are additive that will bring us down to a substantial reduction in emissions. Now, this is an illustrative pathway, but this is what we want to be doing. And we also need to put a time dimension to this, because this at the moment gives you a total mitigation pathway, but what's the time course of that mitigation pathway? That's the next complexity we need to address. So I hope I've managed to stick to time, Donald.
Fantastic. Thank you, Harry, for your update on the research. And we do have some time towards the end of today's session for Q&A, so hold your questions till that point if you have any. Next, we're going to move to our first panel, and this panel is going to be, if I can invite the panelists onto the stage, please. This is the panel for emerging markets. So those of you who are on the emerging markets panel, please join us on the stage now. And I'm going to introduce the moderator, and then he will introduce the rest of his panel. So if you would come onto the stage now, that would be great. This panel is going to be moderated by Mr. Jay Waldvogel. Jay is the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Global Development for Dairy Farmers of America, and he's also one of the board members of the Global Dairy Platform. Jay has more than 30 years' experience in the global dairy industry with leading dairy companies, Campina in Europe, Fonterra Cooperative Group in New Zealand, and also now Dairy Farmers of America in the United States. He's held senior positions right across the dairy industry, from financing to operations, marketing, strategy, M&A, etc. and he is currently serving on a number of industry leadership groups and company boards. And on behalf of the Global Dairy Platform, Jay is also the board member who oversees our Dairy Nourishes Africa initiative. So Jay, I leave it to you to introduce your panel.
Thank you, Mr. Moore, for the lengthy introduction. Thank you for joining us today. Add my appreciation of your coming to hear our story today. Donald mentioned the work that we are doing in Dairy Nourishes Africa. It's not our intent to dive deeply into that. I want to take advantage of our panel to talk more broadly about developing markets and how we evolve. And the first point I want to make before I introduce the panel and kick off is that as we approach dairy pathways to get to a net zero position, we recognize that 20%, give or take, of our footprint is based in the developed world. 80% is in the developing markets. Not only is it 80%, it's the growing portion. Growing population, growing demand that will increase that level of emission. If you believe we have pathways to reduce our footprint in the developed world, and I do, consumers will pay for the products, technology will be available, capital will be available, we can move that needle. But we cannot ignore the developing markets. We have to address those in parallel. They take different tools, different approaches, but they require us to give the same level of commitment. So with that as a background, I'd like to briefly introduce the panel, and I will do briefly because there is a depth of knowledge and background here that you want to get to know, but I'll let you do that personally. First, Dr. Joe Prudy, who is the Associate Vice President for Strategy and Knowledge Department in EFAD, and has a breadth of knowledge in the finance, working in other organizations, including Green Climate Fund and the World Bank. Next is Dr. Thenawat Tenson, who you heard earlier from Donald's introduction, but I will add has a deep appreciation of livestock from personal experience, including being a veterinarian. And then lastly is Mr. Bernard Kimrow, who is the head of Climate Change and Livestock Sustainability in the Kenyan Ministry of Agricultural, Livestock and Forestry, and also has a deep understanding of livestock, having started his career as a dairy livestock production officer in Kenya. So a breadth of knowledge that we don't want to waste today. So with that, I will open with one question that I'll ask each of the panelists, starting with Dr. Puri to answer, which is very simply, from a developed market perspective, we all understand the need to evolve agricultural systems to be more climate smart based, not just dairy, but agricultural systems in general. From your own unique perspectives, what is the greatest limiting factor that stops us from that evolution? What are the things we need to address most urgently, most aggressively? Dr. Puri.
Thank you so much. Such a privilege for me to be here. So before I start, I have a quiz question. We're at a climate COP. Do you know the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere today? Okay, I'll give this answer and then I'll ask you another one. It's 2.4 million trillion tons. Okay, that's the answer. How much carbon dioxide do we need to have in the atmosphere to get to 1.5 degrees? 2.9 million trillion tons. So we have essentially just a very, very small bracket, basically within which we will end up exhausting our so-called carbon budget. And then we will be at, inexorably, the 1.5 degree pathway. And then for 2 degrees, it's essentially, we can only emit 3.7 million trillion tons. And so all of this, what it essentially means is the window of opportunity is today, right? And we've got to do something about it. And what we are seeing is that dairy, agriculture, forests, and other land use sectors are giving us the opportunity to really transition towards, inshallah, a less than 1.5 degree world. So your question was, well, what are the key obstacles that we are witnessing from transitioning to climate smart agriculture? And while I'm not going to try and be completely definitive and exhaustive in all of my solutions, I want to focus on one, which is finance. In developing countries, and I come from a developing country, clearly, when you're trying to adopt new behavior, low emissions, climate resilience, and Harry spoke very eloquently, and I loved your slides, but also your comments on it. Clearly, one of the big challenges of transitioning to low emission, climate resilient pathways is having the financial backing to make that transition. Most small scale farmers, and that's where IFAD works in, that's our target group. There are essentially 3 billion people that are affected by small scale agriculture. That's where most of the livestock activities that can truly help us move the ticker in terms of methane emissions can also take place. But moving that behavior requires that we need to take on some of the risks that these farmers are facing when we are asking them to transition. We've seen that just for adaptation, we will require approximately $340 billion per year by 2030. Sorry, I'm spewing out a number which are very large. But what is really important is knowing that yes, we've got to have financing facilities that will do, amongst other things, help us in the overall policy transition, help farmers to really take on technologies and adopt behaviors that are low emission. So if it's biogas, if it's the adoption of biogas, if it is the adoption of diversified food production methods, if it is the adoption of methods that can reduce enteric fermentation in the case of dairy, if it is the adoption of pathways that can really reduce fermentation or from submerged rice, new types of rice varieties that can also reduce amount of methane in the atmosphere, we need to take on additional financing to provide support for these farmers. But when we go and IFAD works with a lot of small-scale farmers, and they work on plot sizes of less than 2 hectares. But that 3 billion people, like I said, depend on small-scale farmers for production, food, jobs. What that means is that when I go and ask them to change their behaviors, we've got to have the private sector coming in to help us amplify the impact. And while we invest, so our IFAD invested approximately $7.1 billion in developing countries in our last replenishment, including co-financing, what becomes really important is that we've got to have the impact multiplier come in. And the impact multiplier has to be private finance at this point. But private sector doesn't like taking risk. It doesn't like doing things in an uncertain space. So clearly the enabling environment is important, the policy environment is important, but I really want to focus on setting up preparation facilities that can help to set up bankable projects that the private sector will then come on and invest in. And I don't blame them. But for bankable projects, you need to essentially do due diligence. You need to look at the NDCs and the NAPAs and say, well, what can we draw from these that can truly create the concept note that will ensure that, yes, I've got the internal rate of return as well as the rate of return on my investment. And that requires additional work. But even after we set them up, we've got to account for the risk that the private sector does not like taking on. So a guarantee fund, a first loss fund, setting up a credit risk facility, all of these are really important ways in which the international community and the public sector can really make it possible for the private sector to come in to then essentially take on more of the the senior debt opportunities and really to be able to invest in these opportunities. Because without that, we're not going to be able to manage the challenge of 2.9 million trillion tons. Thank you.
Fantastic. Indeed, thank you very much, and for both the thoughtful but also terrifying thought of how close we are to the edge and how much we need to pay attention. With that, I think I will jump to the end of the table and go to Mr. Kimro. Bernard, if I can ask you the same question from your perspective. What do you think are the things that limit the ability to transform agriculture in your experience in Kenya?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jay, and thank you for the opportunity. first of all, I want to make a correction. We have a new government, so there's a change in the name. It's now called the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock Development. So, yeah, we are privileged to be here as a country that is emerging in terms of dairy. What I want to say is that in Kenya, we are looking at a sector that is really supporting a large population. Almost 1 million smallholders operating, so I can understand when Dr. Clark talks about typologies, we need really to look at these typologies, and Kenya is one of those areas where we have 3 different typologies. We are the 3rd largest in terms of milk production in Africa. We have a goal of doubling production from 6 billion liters to 12 billion by 2030. So for us, when we look at dairy, we are looking at it from the point that a global dairy platform has already alluded to. It's from economic, from the social, and from the environment. From economic, I've talked about the number of producers that are involved, and along the value chain, we create almost 2 to 4 million jobs. So there is a large dependence on dairy in terms of economic and livelihoods. Social, milk, I think Kenya is one of the largest in terms of per capita milk consumption at 125 liters or kilograms per capita, which is relatively high for Africa. And therefore, we are looking at ways of increasing, actually we are looking at ways of doubling that through initiatives like school milk programs. So what that means is that there are challenges in terms of how to deliver technologies to the producers. The technologies are there. Livestock technologies essentially are there. When you look at technologies or innovations addressing feeds, we already have those technologies. When you look at technologies that can actually reduce even on manure management, we have them. The biggest issue in terms of creating climate-smart agriculture systems is how can you be able to convince the smallholders that we have to be able to invest in these technologies. Investing in climate adaptation is quite expensive, and I do agree with IFAD in terms of saying that we need to mobilize resources to go into actually supporting the smallholders, and that is where the biggest challenge is. The second point is the issue of market access. Looking across, we are lucky that just yesterday, Kenya, the day before yesterday, Kenya signed a cooperation agreement with some of the countries in Africa for exports. But we do see a lot of barriers in terms of market access. If the smallholders are unable to receive adequate returns, they cannot invest on climate-smart technologies. So that also has an inhibition in terms of adoption of climate-smart agriculture practices and technologies. So for us, how do we mobilize resources to be able to support delivery of technologies which are already there, the smallholders? How can we be able to address the market access issues that are already existing? Those are the 2 main aspects that we are looking at. We also need to reduce the emissions. I'm happy to report that just last week, the Kenya Dairy Board developed a roadmap, or started a roadmap on dairy sustainability in Kenya, which is going to address some of the sustainability issues that we are looking at. So we are working towards net zero in Kenya in terms of dairy. There is a long road to go. How we deliver the climate-smart agriculture technologies, how we address the market access issues is what really is going to influence how we move towards net zero. Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic, thank you very much. It's an important part of what the Global Dairy Platform is doing with the Net Zero Initiative is making certain that we listen to the issues that are in the markets we're trying to help. I think when you hear from Bernard, you understand the depth of the experience and knowledge, and it's important that we understand how to find solutions for their problems in their markets and not simply assume we have them on our own. Tiamat, if I can ask you to close with the same question. What do you think are the limiting factors from your perspective in agriculture, in FAO, in livestock? Please.
Sure. Thank you very much for your questions. I bring you back to 1999 when FAO discussed with the government of Thailand, Department of Livestock Development, that I was working with them before. We discussed the activities or the project on crop livestock integrations. And even though at that times we not really understand what is a we know the objective, we know the project document, but we don't really know what is a real impact afterwards until today. In 1999, zero biogas in Thailand, in animal farms, livestock farm, zero. But today, more than 3,000 biogas from small, medium, and large scale, from 10 cows up to 2,000 cows. And you can see that in 2010, we captured the carbon, and compared to today's, it's double. In 2010, the biogas that we produce, electricity that we produce from biogas, compared to today's, is double. And that's why once we see the impact and result that we get from the support at that times is enormous. And now it's not only for livestock sectors, but also in terms of the biogas project and also in terms of crop, livestock, soil, nutrient cyclings. It really shows the result of today's, when the price, the energy price is increasing, when the fertilizers price is increasing. And that's why we see the real impact. We see the real success that happened from the investment when FAO and also other partners supported us in 1999. And that's why today when we are discussing about pathways to dairy net zero, together with IFAD and others partners and also Green Climate Funds, to make sure that we can provide more support, we can see more actions, and we can see more results at the country level. And that's why I also discussed about just last two months, in September, when we visited India, and when the Prime Minister of India is talking about the new initiative of biogas, small-scale biogas for small-scale dairy farms, and also talking about the manual initiative, waste management initiative at the farm level. And we can see a lot of movement, a lot of actions. And I'm sure that in the next few years, we will see more results, how we can reduce the greenhouse gas emission, how we can generate income for our farmers from biogas, from manuals initiative, that farmers, they can sell their manuals to the market, and also they can sell the carbon to the market as well. And I think this one is an initiative that we have seen. And that's why today when we discuss with IFAD and also Green Climate Fund, to make sure that we can bring the result from the past experience to do more for the future. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. We unfortunately are going to cut off questions for the panel at the moment. They're all going to stay at the front, and at the end of the next session there'll be a chance for questions you might have, so feel free to hold them. I will close with a brief comment specific to Dairy Nourishes Africa. You see the kind of thought that goes into the developing world in general. All of this sits behind our work on the ground right now in East Africa, where the project has evolved from pilots to actual proof points to now scaling up across Tanzania. And you heard earlier from Donald our commitment to find resourcing to truly make transformational investments. So with that, Donald, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Jay. And can we show our appreciation one more time for this panel? We're going to stay on the stage. And we're now going to move to our second panel. So for those of you who remember that you're on the panel, the second panel, would you please join us on the stage? The second panel is about our developed dairy markets, and it's going to be led by Dr. Margrethe Jonkman. Dr. Jonkman is a member of the executive leadership team at Royal Friesland Campina in the Netherlands, where she's led R&D since 2014, working on a variety of programs, including fresh and long-life dairy consumer products and worldwide infant and toddler nutrition. She joined the company in 1997, and she currently serves on the board of directors of the Global Dairy Platform as well. So Margrethe, can I please hand over to you to introduce your fellow panelists?
Thank you very much, Donald, for the introduction. And this is a panel about the developed countries. And as we heard before today, the developed countries are responsible for approximately 20% of the greenhouse gas emissions of dairy. And if we look at the carbon footprint of these countries, they are around 1 to 2 kilogram carbon per kilogram of milk. That looks quite low, and that's a result of many actions already taken in the last couple of years. And if we look, for instance, at the Netherlands, then what we just published a paper about it, and then we know that in the last 30 years we got a reduction of carbon footprint of about 35%. So a lot has been done. But we also realize that we need to take the next steps, that we need to make them, we want to make them, and in my opinion, we also can do it. And I'm very happy today that we are going to discuss that and to see if from the industry part, and that's represented by Hanna Zundergaard, who is the CSO of Arla Foods, but also the deputy chair of the board of GDP. And also that we discuss it with a farmer, because it starts with our dairy farmers. So very happy that we have here Marilyn Hershey. She is a farmer in the US, but also she is the chair of the Dairy Management Inc. and of the US FRA. So let's start, I think, with the farmer. And please could you, Marilyn, share your reflection about the next steps we need to take as dairy farmers, as companies in developed countries.
Thank you. And first of all, I'm going to talk just briefly about our farm. Dwayne and I have a dairy farm about 40 miles north of the Chesapeake Bay. That's a very large watershed that is in the United States. And so conservation, new practices have always been a part of our best management practices, making new improvements. And so, you know, contouring land is something my father did, and because we have rolling hills and there's a lot of runoff from the soil erosion. Soil quality, water quality are two things that are critically important for us as farmers. And so this has always been front and center for Dwayne and I as we make decisions on our farm. But as I look at what we did in 2017, we installed a methane digester. We milk about 800 cows. So we were able to put in a digester, and each year we can make improvements to that. The first year it was simply just capturing the methane from the manure from the cows. And we have improved and added things to do with that methane digester. Currently, we are taking in food waste that also would be put into landfills, and rather than put into a landfill, we can put it through the digester and also capture that methane. And that's a step that we do. You know, this is kind of a prelude to what we do in the U.S. dairy. And in 2020, we made commitments with the U.S. dairy industry to be carbon neutral by 2050, knowing that there has to be improvements, there has to be technologies, there has to be ways that we can bring in practices for farmers to be able to give the farmers the tools to be able to get to net zero. It's a journey, it's a process, it's steps. It's not something we're going to accomplish right away. I would say 3 years in, yes, we still look at digesters as part of that solution, but also looking at a lot of different ways we can have new technology to bring down that enteric emissions from cattle and improve our carbon footprint. We have been on that journey of improving our carbon footprint, we're looking at all size farms, not just large farms, medium size or small, but we're looking at how do we equip all farmers. It's not going to be the same tools for the farms. It's going to be different tools for each farmer. But that's what we have been working on. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your explanation about what you're doing on your own farm. Really looking at the part of digesters and not only manure, but also at the other ways. But also very nice to see how you're looking ahead for farmers in America, what you can do. So then maybe over to Europe. And Hannah, what's your perspective from the dairy industry in Europe?
Yes, thank you, Margrethe, and pleased to be here. So let me comment on how we are working with the more developing part also within the Pathway project. So I think what we have identified, as Margrethe is saying, is that we need to move further. We've achieved a lot, but we need to move further. And Campina, Friesland and Arla, we've decided to try and serve that track, as it were, within GDP. Both companies, or in both companies, we've taken a very data-led approach to this journey. We have set clear targets already, science-based targets, both companies. And so have another of other members, of course, of GDP. We have also created schemes, both companies, to incentivize farmers on this journey, and I think, as was said in the previous panel, that's also a very important step here, that we incentivize farmers to make or to take action. So moving on from here, the question we're asking ourselves is, we can do a lot as individual cooperatives and companies, but how can we accelerate this journey further by working together within the framework on Pathway, within the framework of GDP? And what we're working on and developing is a work stream where we will look at can we accelerate technologies and the whole research side of those technologies? Can we move that faster by working together? Can we bring that research faster out on farm, so scale it up faster by the pilots that we run on farm to scale technologies up? I think everyone knows that a lot of our companies are working on Bovaer, for example, or feed additives, but we are doing it individually. We are doing a number of pilots, but could we do that in a bigger scale if we work together? We are also looking at how do we set standards for farmers quicker. Earlier today, we were having a conversation around carbon sequestration, which is very important to bring that into the journey here. But there is not an internationally recognized method for counting that right now. There is work going on, and both Campina and Arla Foods have been involved in that, together with a number of other farmers. But that's an example where we need an internationally recognized way of measuring carbon sequestration. Those kind of projects are key. How can we make those become available faster? One of the areas we're looking at is the whole conversation around regenerative agriculture. I think it would be very meaningful if some of the farmer-owned organizations here are also involved in setting the standard for that, so that it becomes science-based, so that we see how is the actual contribution of that way of working to our climate, biodiversity, and soil health agenda. So that's what we are doing within Pathway and within GDP. It's early days now, but as soon as we create this agenda, we want to bring more companies and more partner organizations also into this room, and hopefully we'll be there soon where we can do that.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. Very clear from your reflection. Also, it's important to develop technologies. It's important to have common frameworks and standards. And if I think along on that, Marilyn, maybe to you, what would be the most important item if you could choose what you really would like to have and what you need to get the next things, the next steps made?
You know, it's hard to pin it down to just one, because I think it is a toolbox of things that we need. But I think of collaboration, and you know, collaboration will start in the United States with the farmers collaborating together in the United States, but then it goes past that, and it's collaborating with pathways, it's collaborating with other countries, coming together and understanding that we can accomplish so much more together. I think also you have to look outside of dairy and collaboration across agriculture. And because agriculture has solutions, we know that, and it will be part of great solutions in healing this planet. But we have to come together and achieve those together.
Yeah, I think then if I look at all your remarks, I think very important is that we develop together new technology, set the standards, but really do it together. And together we can make these steps. And it will not be easy, I think, because the last 20%, 25%, it always seems so easy, but that you really need to step up. But what, in your opinion, if you would look, for instance, 10 years ahead, we are here together again at the next COP, how would it look like?
You know, I'm very optimistic that we will have those tools developed. You know, I saw a young man who was showing me something that he has developed, and it's working on cattle. It fits over the nostrils, and it captures the methane and converts it to CO2. It's very early stages, but those are the sorts of things that are going to start coming out and start being developed. And I think it's just important. It'll be a very exciting time. It's a very exciting time to be a farmer. I think there's a lot of opportunity coming down the pike with all the different developing technologies we have.
And then maybe then the closing remark for Hannah. Imagine you're at COP37. How would it look like, dairy farming?
So I think we need to take some COPs before then and get some action before then. I think one thing or two things I will say. One is I do think that farmers at large are very good at transforming. You know, very good at changing, and I think we just need to make it clear what change it is that we really need. And if I was going to say one thing in 37, I think we'll be obsessed about soil to an extent that we're not today. You know, I think we're going to go underground to find out what's really going on. I think we're going to build some real knowledge about that, maybe even knowledge about how it links to our own health, how it links to human health. You know, that whole space, I think, is going to be one of those that will really develop as well.
Thank you very much as well, Hannah, as Marilyn. I think quite exciting times ahead, but if I hear you both, you also think we can do it. And I think that's a good outlook for the future. Not easy, but we can do it.
We can.
Fantastic. Thanks to our panelists from the developing markets. And again, thanks to all of the panelists. We now have some time for Q&A. So, Harry, would you mind joining us on the stage again? And we have some time for Q&A. So if you have a question, I think we have a roving mic or two. Do we have a roving mic? We have questions at the back of the room. So I see two people with their hands up at the back. So if we can get a mic over there, please. Okay, our first question. Can you please introduce yourself and let us know who on the panel you would like to address your question to, please?
Oh, okay. So, hi everybody. My name is Hashimi. I'm from Japan, and I will just ask generally, not anyone in particular. But so in our country, the majority of the population is actually lactose intolerant. And taking into consideration that Asian populations and African populations are, the majority of us are lactose intolerant. And taking into consideration that we can get all the nutrients from plants directly, and the fact that we're facing a methane emergency right now, and that we are not really infants anymore, and that we don't really need breast milk from cows from different species, where do you find the logic right now in continuing dairy production and consumption? Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the question. Margaretha, can I maybe start with you as our scientist in the room, nutrition scientist?
Thanks a lot. What we think, if you look at a sustainable diet, is that dairy will all over the globe play a very important role in, because it gives a lot of nutrients, a very wide range of nutrients, but also very nutrient dense. And if you look in all different kind of modeling, if it's Eat Lancet, if it's SUSFAM, then you see that dairy plays a dominant role in a sustainable diet. And if you look at the lactose intolerant part, when you are lactose intolerant, everybody still can drink 200 ml of milk a day without problems. And there are many dairy products like cheese and yogurts where there's no or hardly any lactose in it anymore, because the bacteria transform it into lactic acid. So for these products, there is no problem if you look for lactose intolerancy.
Thank you. Next question, please introduce yourself and where you're from.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Xin Huang. I'm Secretary General of the International Meat Secretariat. I'm based in Paris, France. And I have a general question for those in the panel that would like to answer it, but I start with a statement and you tell me whether you agree with me or disagree with me and help educate me if you disagree with me. I heard the word regenerative agriculture mentioned, and I believe that all agriculture should be regenerative. Okay, so let me repeat that. All agriculture should be regenerative. And so I hope that we're not going to get stuck in a war of words where we define regenerative agriculture as a particular way of doing things, when in fact industrial agriculture should be regenerative, organic agriculture should be regenerative, every kind of agriculture should be regenerative. So if you disagree with me, please help me out and educate me. Thank you.
Hannah, can I maybe ask you to touch on that first, and then maybe Tanawat from an FAO perspective could touch on as well. So Hannah first, then Tanawat.
Yeah, thank you. I think my knowledge mainly relates to dairy when it comes to regenerative, I will be perfectly honest. And I think within the dairy sector, I think what we are developing now is what is the regenerative standard? What does it mean to be regenerative? And what are the science-based benefits that you get from that? And I think that work is still going on. In the same way as we want to work science-based in other areas, we also want to do it here. So I think what we need to understand is, what is it about regenerative that makes a real difference, and how do we move towards that? From a kind of philosophical level, I agree with you that we need to move towards regenerating and not be extracting.
To return to a role where he served for 8 years under President Barack Obama. He was the longest serving member of President Obama's original cabinet, and prior to his appointment to the cabinet, he also served for 2 terms as the governor of Iowa and served in the Iowa State Senate and as the mayor of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Under his leadership, the USDA is leading the way in harnessing agriculture as part of the solution to climate. Through unprecedented investments in innovative approaches to climate change adaptation and mitigation, such as through the new Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities and the Inflation Reduction Act. The USDA is playing a major and a pivotal role in positioning agriculture in America and across the world to deliver climate solutions. Additionally, the USDA is advancing alongside the UAE, the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate, to increase support for climate-smart agriculture and food systems innovation. Secretary Vilsack, it's my honor to welcome you to the stage.
Not a problem.
Thank you.
Donald, thank you very, very much. The one thing you left out of my introduction was my work for the dairy industry, the Dairy Export Council. Well, I want to thank the organizers of this meeting, the Republic of Uruguay, the Global Dairy Platform, and the International Dairy Federation for putting together this important event. Sustainably managed livestock plays an undeniably important role in providing nutrition to billions of people. And we also know there is much promise in the sector's ability to mitigate the impacts of climate change. Improved dairy management is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Emissions from enteric fermentation on a per gallon of milk basis decreased by 7% between 2007 and 2017, due in large part to improvements in herd management, resulting in better animal diets and improved genetics. Dairy farmers are also making important improvements in manure management. Manure digester installations in the U.S. increased 30% between 2018 and 2021. These newer digesters are larger and mitigate more greenhouse gas emissions, almost 3.5 times more emissions than digesters that were installed in 2010. A year ago, at COP26, I spoke at Pathways to Dairy Net Zero event, and the United States was proud to be the first country to express support for this important initiative. In just over a year, support for Pathways to Dairy Net Zero has grown to more than 140 organizations. That includes large and small companies, governments, associations, and academic institutions. In fact, this diverse group of supporters represents well over 40% of dairy production around the world. This past panel truly symbolizes the significant progress that is made through the commitments, investments, collaboration, and research to support tools and resources to help the dairy industry achieve net zero. At USDA, we are very focused on this goal. As Donald indicated, our new Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities initiative is, I think, a great example of collaboration and how we're working with the private sector to reduce methane emissions while creating new markets for dairy products. On September 14th, I announced 70 projects that will promote the development and marketing of climate-smart commodities. At its core, this effort is about ensuring farmers, ranchers, and producers have the ability to produce the sustainable, high-value commodities for which we are now seeing an increased market demand. Tapping into this demand can provide dairy producers with additional revenue streams and demonstrate the credibility of climate-smart practices. To help provide this credibility, projects will include resources to help monitor, verify, and report greenhouse gas benefits. Of these projects, 9 are focused primarily on dairy, totaling an investment of over $400 million. And we expect many of these projects to have important methane benefits to dairy farms across the United States. One of these projects features the Dairy Farmers of America, whom you've heard earlier in a panel discussion. Their project will connect farmers to emerging low-carbon dairy markets and make sure the financial benefits are captured at the farm. Now, in addition to our Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities initiative, USDA is working internationally as well to advance climate-smart dairy production. We're collaborating with the Department of State, FAO, the Global Dairy Platform, and IFPRI to mobilize support, participation, and collaboration among countries in East Africa, the Americas, and Asia under the Pathways to Dairy Net Zero initiative. This Pathway initiative will work with 9 early adopter countries, starting with Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda, to help them secure funding through the Green Climate Fund to establish dairy transformation programs. We believe these programs will target reductions in greenhouse gas emissions while at the same time delivering increased productivity, improved farmer income, and reduced food loss and waste. We also know that to achieve our goals, we need to invest more in research and development in promising new technologies. We're starting to see new tools to help reduce methane emissions from enteric fermentation in the market, but we need further research and early adopters before they can be deployed at scale. This is where public-private partnerships help, by supporting that research and development and deployment of those technologies and other emission-reducing innovations. On that note, I'm pleased to hear that Pathways to Dairy Net Zero has joined AIM for Climate as an innovation sprint. Now, an innovation sprint is an acceleration of technology into the marketplace. In this case, the innovation sprint on this important topic, called the Greener Cattle Initiative, was launched by the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research and the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy. The Greener Cattle Initiative is an industry-oriented research consortium addressing enteric methane emissions from cattle, and it will make its initial research awards in 2023. This innovation sprint illustrates the importance of this issue, and I look forward to seeing more AIM for Climate innovation sprints connect and leverage opportunities of mutual interest between governments and industry. In closing, I want to take an opportunity to thank today's experts from Uruguay, FAO, and the International Fund for Agricultural Development, and the private sector, who've demonstrated that it really takes all of us working together to optimize productivity and reduce emissions. I think we all realize we're facing an existential threat. I think it's important that we encourage all parties to commit the necessary resources to move more quickly to deliver sustainable transformations in this sector. As our efforts today will safeguard nutrition security and sustain 1 billion livelihoods for tomorrow, while at the same time securing a better future for all of us. I'm looking forward to hearing about the results coming from our collective work that will be achieved when we meet again in COP28 in the United Arab Emirates. I think the dairy industry has an enormous opportunity and a responsibility to respond to this great challenge. And I know from my previous experience working with this industry that they are truly committed to a net zero future. And I'm excited that the Department of Agriculture in the U.S. is going to be a partner with the industry to accomplish that goal by 2050. And I'm also excited about the opportunity that we will have as we work through our Partnership for Climate Smart initiative to be able to share information with the rest of the world. We recognize and appreciate that it's important and necessary for us to continue to collaborate as new technologies are developed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as we learn more about methane reduction and methane conversion. I think it's going to be important for us to make sure that we share on an international stage the developments so that we reach net zero, not just for one industry in one country, but for the entire industry around the globe. So thank you all very much for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you very much to Secretary Vilsack and to all of our speakers today, Minister Matos in particular, and to the IDF for co-hosting today's event as well. If I could invite the speakers to the stage, I think we're to be on the first step. Was that what we're being told? On the first step, so we can take a photograph of all of our speakers today. And thank you to you, our audience, both online and in person today, for joining us for this event. And as I mentioned before, if you have additional questions, please feel free to speak to any of our speakers after the event today. Thank you all for your time. Bye for now.